everyone. I'm Glen Thomas. I actually work quite local. I actually work at Disney Mobile, who are just over the road in the AOL building. My day job is making iPhone games. At the moment, we're actually #1 and #2 on the App Store. Sure, sorry. And in my spare time, I kind of mess about with CSS and HTML and JavaScript. And this is a talk about a little app that I actually built about a month or so ago. We've been on crunch, so I haven't worked on it recently. So if anyone's familiar with CSS3 and background images such as Css Gradients, the specification for them is quite powerful, and you can do a lot of really cool things with just CSS and make some complex images. The thing is the language is kind of complex, particularly if you're adding multiple gradients together. So what I did is I built a little web app that allows you to parse CSS, take it apart, and manipulate background gradients. And I call it the CSS Background Composer. So you may be familiar with Leah Verou's site. She collected a collection of patterns that people had made by hand, all in CSS. So all of these images here are actually produced by stacking up multiple background gradients. So we can go into one of these and we can see all this CSS code being used to create this. So this is basically quite a few radial gradients all stacked up. So we can copy out this CSS code and then go to the Background Composer. This is all hosted on my GitHub site, so it's glan.github.com/CSS patterns workbench. That was kind of the working title that I had for it. I've kind of since changed it a bit, but kept the name the same. So in the window at the bottom here, we can actually paste our CSS code in, and then the tool will actually parse that and show us what the pattern looks like. And then we have all these layers, kind of a bit like Photoshop, representing each of these gradients. When we select a layer, the CSS code is actually highlighted, so we can actually click bits of the CSS code and it will automatically tell us which layer is actually contributing. And then just like Photoshop, you can move layers around and manipulate it. So you have your properties that are producing that particular gradient, all the layers stacked up and the code below. You can also do composite effects. So if we were to select all of these layers, there's things that we can do where we can, it'd be kind of cool if we rotated the hue and completely transformed the document. And what that's doing is, if I rotate this, you can see all the CSS properties, might be a bit small, changing in sequence. So all of the patterns on Leah Verou's site are pretty easy to pull apart and parse. We can also build new things from scratch. So this is a kind of simple pattern I built, which is just a radial gradient with a sharp stop and linear gradients behind. Going a bit more complicated. Does anyone recognize this pattern? No. This is actually the logo for the Computer History Museum in Mountain View, all built by stacking up linear and radial gradients. That might be a bit dark, but that was the picture that I put on the starting slide. It's several radial gradients stacked up to produce a kind of solar eclipse type scene. This is something that I did for a demo a couple of months ago, which is actually a company logo. I don't work for those guys. I was presenting for them. So that was just some cool things that you can do by stacking up the gradients. Now this one is interesting. If you stare at the screen long enough, it will actually become 3D. So this was like when I was playing around with actually making some gradients in the tool, because it's really easy. You can just select layers and move them around. If you start squishing the dimensions of certain layers, you can actually create an auto-stereographic image. So As I said, all of this is up on GitHub. I really like people writing tickets and saying, hey, it would be really cool if your tool did this. So things that I've got outstanding to do are things like prefixing. I'm actually dealing with the vendor prefixes using a library that Leo Varu wrote called Prefix Free. So I write all of my code without prefixes, and then I rely on Prefix Free to fill in those prefixes depending on the browser. Also, all these demos, what I do is I actually save my CSS to a gist. And then if I take the gist code, the little hash that comes with the gist, I can take that, and then you can stick it on the end of the URL. And then what that will do is actually load the contents, the CSS contents from the gist into the editor. So it gives you a way of sharing patterns from user to user without having to copy a chunk of CSS. Cool. Thanks, Seth. Anyone have any questions? Cool. Thanks very much, everyone.